Good afternoon, and welcome to this Arts Month Community Conversation. I'm Jonathan Toman with the Cultural Office of the Pikes Peak region, and today we're excited to bring you the role of intersectionality within the arts community. This is the sixth of 8 community conversations that will take place throughout the month of October, and the second and final within Poetry, Prose, and Comedy Week of Arts Month. These community conversations, curated by local artists and arts leaders, will showcase a variety of timely and relevant topics within various art sectors of the Pikes Peak region. Today, as I mentioned, that topic is the role of intersectionality within the arts community. The moderators and panelists for these community conversations have been absolutely exceptional, and today we'll continue that streak. Joining me now is Ashley Cornelius, the co-director of Poetry 719, among many other things, and today's moderator. Hi, Ashley, how are you?
Hi, I'm really good. How are you doing?
Doing well, glad to have you. Ashley is a nationally recognized spoken word poet in Colorado and the co-director of Poetry 719, a Black-run poetry group in Colorado Springs that amplifies the voices of marginalized communities and people of color through art and creative self-expression. Ashley has a background in poetry education and was the program director of an arts nonprofit in Denver focused on poetry workshops and curriculum. Ashley assembled 4 panelists and will introduce them momentarily. One housekeeping item: these 5 will have complete artistic control of the conversation. That said, I will get out of the way and let Ashley get us started.
Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm so excited to talk about intersectionality and its role within the arts community. And we have 4 incredible panelists, and I'm going to bring them on and have them introduce themselves. So first, we're going to bring in Goddess Tyescha.
Hi, my name is Goddess Tyescha. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. I've been organizing for about 20 years, and I've worked in a lot of intersectionalities of trying to eradicate racism, trying to promote environmental justice, trying to eradicate homophobia, and all the isms that exist, unfortunately, in our society. I have a dual MSc from Fordham University in education, and I have taught for over 10 years in a plethora of spaces from the South Bronx all the way to District 20 here in El Paso County. And I'm really excited to talk about arts and intersectionalities.
Awesome, thank you so much. Next up, we're gonna bring in Michael Ferguson.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael. I go by Skillzilla in the poetry community. I am a graduate student at CSU Pueblo and want to teach. I focus on amplifying and bringing in Black voices back into the rhetoric and literature spaces. I've been involved in the poetry community here, and I'm really excited about this conversation. I think it's very important.
Thank you so much, Michael. And next up, we have Irina.
Hello, my name is Irina Amouzou, and I'm currently a student at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. I'm studying women's ethnic studies with a certificate in gender and sexuality. I'm involved in the community in a multitude of ways, through activism, but also through poetry and in the arts community. I'm also a founding member of the community design team of Empower Community High School up in Aurora, where we empower particularly students of color to take charge of this world, to fight all the isms, to know that they are powerful. If any of them are watching, I really hope that they enjoy this, and it is always for the young people, and I really hope to continue working in education, as well as just like community involvement as a whole.
Thank you so much. And finally, we have Nico Wilkinson.
Hi, everyone. My name's Nico. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am a poet, a printmaker, an organizer within the queer and arts and reproductive rights communities, and a farmer. And I'm really excited to be here, especially among so many wonderful people. And thank you for tuning in.
Thank you all so much. As you can see, this panel is absolutely incredible. Before we get started with our questions, I did just want to address intersectionality, which is the ways in which multiple, discriminated, disenfranchised identities interact, intersect, and combine, right? Looking at the holistic picture, but the important thing is that those identities are discriminated against, oppressive, or disenfranchised identities that we look at on these intersections. I want to do more work on this as my puppy is having the time of his life. look into Audre Lorde, who has done incredible work around intersectionality and intersectional feminism. So we're going to start off with this question, and I'll introduce each person to share. But the first question is, how do you understand your intersectional identities, and how does that show up for you in your art? And we're going to start with Goddess Tyescha.
Thank you. I think that's such a compelling question because I think that my art in poetry and in writing has really, I've used it as a therapeutic place to be able to talk about my intersectionality and the way that I have been able to experience the world and the way the world experiences me. So very much so growing up in Harlem, New York, and trying to figure out who I was and what my identity was, and growing up Latinx and being able to figure out what it was to be ladylike, quote unquote, because of the genitalia that was assigned to me at birth was very difficult. It was very difficult to figure out what felt comfortable and what didn't feel comfortable. My first piece of poetry was actually about toxic masculinity in essence and how I felt so oppressed by masculine figures in my life every single time I spoke out about being non-feminine in their view, and how I didn't want to live up to the expectations of just having children and having a family and that being the only expectation of my whole life, and not wanting my life to secular around that and the fixation around having children. And so I think art has really played a huge amount of piece of therapy for me to explore who I was. And as I grew older, my art grew with me. And it has really been able to explore all of those pieces that we didn't necessarily have vocabulary for in such an explicit way like we do now. And then also explore my emotional intelligence about the way I was feeling and how I was feeling, even when I didn't quite have words for it. It's given me liberation and freedom to say, this is the way I see things, and this is the way I see myself experiencing things. And it's also allowed me to connect to other poets, to other speakers. I know that you just brought up Audre Lorde. I am a huge fan of feeling pleasure as a point of activism, and how every day I'm trying to feel joy. And how feeling anything is actually living, and without feelings that it isn't living. And I really feel like my poetry has been able to explore that also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Goddess Tyescha, for that very insightful and powerful commentary. Same question over to Michael.
For me, it's been like, so I grew up, I'm a nerd. I love fantasy and comic books, and I didn't realize until I started writing like how whiteness was the default. And I automatically defaulted to writing white characters, even though I'm a black man, and like how difficult it is. I have a degree in literature and didn't read very many black authors at all, and so that just reinforces that default, that norm that I should be writing about white experiences, even though that is not my experience at all. So what art has done is made me like look at that and look at why that would be, and analyze why when I write do I default to a white male point of view, unless I think about it. And then when I think about having to write about a black character from a black perspective, like what does that mean to me as a black person? Because anti-blackness is, it's taught, and we're not immune to it, even if we are part of that community. White supremacy is, the default nature in a lot of academic spaces. So what it has done for me is allowed me to embrace that, embrace my worldview. Hi, there's Cora. It has allowed me to learn more about myself and to become more authentic in my writing. It's allowed me to look at how, because I'm a black man, but what does that mean for a woman? Like what type of what are women seeing in media? What are gay men seeing? Like when this is when the heterosexual white male is default. So I've been able to find a community that reinforces who I am, that makes me realize that who I am is important, that my individuality as a Black person is important, that and that it's important to speak from my unique perspective, that that it's something that we all should strive for, that we all deserve, that we should all encourage in everybody, to be able to acknowledge that their identity is individual, and that we all have shared experiences that also can reinforce and create a community. And that's what I found within the poetry community, within Poetry 719. And that's why I have an opportunity like this to speak about it. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Say hi, Cora.
Yeah, Cora. And I think you bring up such an important part, right, is representation and the default, right? If you ever Google an image, you will almost always get a white looking person, a heterosexual looking relationship, cis folks. And so really addressing like when there's intersectionality, you have to say, I would like a Black person in a lesbian relationship who's at the computer, right? We have to put all of these presets in order to get representation. So I think it's really powerful that you're addressing that right in characters and the ways in which we start to think of our own narratives, and making sure to reinforce our identities as true throughout our art. So next up on that same question is Irina.
Awesome. So when I think of intersectionality, particularly when it applies to myself as a Black person, I think of Blackness as inherently intersectional. And I think about it this way when I'm writing, because sometimes I'll get on myself and I'll think I need to write about Blackness. In this time and space, I need to write about what it is to be Black and Black experience. But then I have to get out of my head and realize that all the things I'm writing about, all of my human experiences, that counts, right? So like if that means writing about my gender identity, if that means writing about my class, where I am in like this class structure, if that means writing about my politics, that is all Blackness as well. And because historically Blackness has been made into such a monolith and our art has been policed, what counts as Black art, what counts like as something that is genuine and coming from the community, it's been so policed and just like made into a monolith. Everything that I do counts as Black art because Blackness is inherently intersectional. And that means that I'm Black regardless of what I may be experiencing in the time, what I may be like writing about, what I may be really voicing at the time, or like if I'm talking about my gender, my Blackness is always going to be interacting with it. It's never in isolation. So I mean, the intersectionality part is always working, especially as a like extremely marginalized person in many parts of my identity, like class, race, gender, sexuality, all the things, all the time. Nothing is ever non-existent. We as ourselves are never living with outside of a vacuum, in a vacuum. So I will never have an interaction where my Blackness, my gender, my sexuality, my class are never not being interacted with. And just like I've just been practicing remembering that and making sure that everything that I put out, it is valid, it is Black, and it counts.
Thank you so much. Another like so deeply resonant and powerful, and this reminder that everything we do, right, is a representation of our identity. And that you're right, it is always happening, right? I think of it as like air. It just like is. It is how we work, how we operate. And sometimes I think people can hear the word intersectionality and parse it out and tell me about your Black experience, your femme experience, your queer experience versus like, what is all of that doing at all moments of the time? So thank you so much. And then we'll close out this first question with Nico.
So when I think about art and the role that it's had in terms of coming to a place of acceptance and like understanding of my identities is because, well, it's because of art. And that's the importance of representation. A distinct point in my adolescence was when I made a pivot from reading what I was being told to be read and reading what my friends were reading to, I'm not seeing myself here. Like I don't understand. There's this dissonance going on, and then relying on art to find myself in that way. Whether that was reading, young adult novels that actually represented like the attraction that I felt, or having characters that experience gender in the way that I do. I think the unfortunate thing is that, unfortunate is that we will never, because of the complexity of intersectionality, it is nearly impossible to find the exact representation of yourself in the media that you want to find it in. And I think that's what leads a lot of artists to make art, is because we have these experiences and then we don't want other people to feel alone in the ways that we have. And I have come to this work as a queer and trans person, and a trans person who has a uterus, and that comes with these really interesting dynamics when it comes to working in reproductive rights and health, in which so much of that work has become, it feels like it is made to be so woman specific, and therefore can feel really exclusive, despite it having an equal impact on my own life. And one thing that has been very interesting in the role of art and being able to experience art, over this last year, I've been trying to read more art in Spanish, and because I'm a Latinx person, and language is such a big part of my life. And going from a place where I was pretty proficient in Spanish and then not being able to engage with that part of my identity because of my queerness, because that's a part of my story, is I find I've had to separate myself from that and my family, as a result of who I am and who I've found myself to be. And in the recent passing of my grandmother, I'm finding I'm really hungry for understanding myself and my Latinx identity through art. And it's really hard, because of language and because of the languages that we're able to grow up with, or the languages we can't. And I can get more, and I can get more into it later, but in that way, art has been a door opening as well as a barrier based on language. And that's a barrier that I'm trying to fight to get over, in my own life. And that's been a new struggle for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico, for your vulnerability and honesty and bringing to light the ways in which like art is also like ancestral, it's heritage, it's identity work. And when I was learning Spanish, like back in school, I remember like the ultimate of like when I knew that like I had integrated this language was when I could understand jokes, when I could understand art, when I could like read poems, when I could like really dive deep into these cultural experiences. And art is this like higher level of understanding and being. And so I'm so grateful that you brought that into this space. So this next question is going to be for Michael. How do you approach writing characters outside of your identity?
I'm in a class right now, and this student wrote horror, like 80s like genre story. It was about this. It was, the tropey girl, nerdy girl who has no life outside of studying and needs to have sex to feel like they're a real person. And I realized, like, as I was like, this is just misogynist. Like, this is not, you can play homage to, the genre it's coming from without remaining in these misogynist tropes, these things that were written by, wealthy white men, which is pretty much what they wanted to see on screen. And so I gave that feedback in class, and it was not well received by the person. They say, well, this is what, what was going on in these stories. I was like, well, it's 2020. We don't need to keep reliving this. We can do better while paying homage to what came before. And I think what the approach that someone needs to take is like, one, respect of whatever the identity is of the person outside of what you're reading. Just think of one of whoever you're representing. Think of that person reading it, and how would they feel if this was a negative representation. So that's the first thing I think of. And then if I'm writing a homosexual character or a woman or whatever, like I would try to have someone from that represents that identity to read it. Like, am I doing this right? Is this offensive? Does this feel authentic? That's another way. And then failing that, if I don't have that available, when I'm writing, just treat everybody like humans. Like, don't write tropes. Don't write it's really cheesy to say, but write them as if you're writing yourself, as a whole human being, so that there's no, even if you do something wrong, at least it came from a wholesome place. And then if you did something that might be offensive or inaccurate, then that's when you go back to someone that has that identity, that representation, and you can ask them about, like, well, what was wrong with this? How can I fix it? So I think that's the most important thing, is to realize that everyone is a human. Everyone is a whole human, not a trope, not a portion of an identity, not just a characteristic that you're trying to take to add, whatever piece of diversity to this piece of writing that you have. It's important to think of, because our identities, like Irina was saying, are all connected. It's not just one piece. It's all part of an interlocking puzzle. And at one point, I might be more slang, be more urban Black man, and then in another environment, I'll speak as I am now, and code switch, because that's how I need to survive. And that isn't one aspect of my character. It contributes to the whole of my character, and everyone has that, and it's important to acknowledge that everyone does. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. That really made me think about, right, when we're in movies or stories, these scales, right, of what we typically see is, if there is a trans person in a show, their whole entire character line is about them being trans, about their parents' relationship, about them getting beat up, like all of it, versus like, I had a good day in Spanish class today, or I saw a butterfly, right? It's always very specific to the identity. And so I think what I'm hearing and what we want to pull out is, like, we can just have storylines, right? Our storylines, especially like around women, folks of color, queer identities, trans identities, it doesn't have to just be about that, right? We are other people, other things happen to us. And that's what I love to see in writing, right? Where maybe we don't even address it. Like, it's not even a question, it just is. And then the other important part is that, like, there's a mystery and she's solving it. So thank you so much for bringing that into this space. All right, so the next question I'm gonna ask is for Irina. So how has intersectionality been misunderstood in the general discourse?
Awesome. So especially in this very political time, everybody and their mom wants to talk about intersectionality, and it's the buzzword, everybody's using it. That's how you show that you're woke or you're inclusive, without understanding at all what it means. And then it becomes very, I would even say, disrespectful to the entire framework and concept of intersectionality, which was, as a theme, has been happening for years and years, right? Even through years of Black activism. But the phrase was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw in a legal framework, trying to describe this invisible spot in legality where people aren't seen, and particularly where people who are raced Black and gendered women aren't seen, right? So it's particularly trying to represent people who are Black women in the legal atmosphere, saying that these types of people are invisible, and use the framework of intersectionality in order to address that issue. And like, you're looking at the intersections of oppressions. So Blackness as an oppression, queerness as an oppression, womanness or being just not a man as an oppression. And that is what intersectionality looks like. Like, it looks to see the people who are invisible. But the way that it is being used right now in public discourse is like, everybody is intersectional and everybody has all these identities that make up who they are. But then we don't talk about how do these specific identities that have to do with oppression interact, like how do they interact with the outside world? How does existing as a Black, queer, disabled person affect you in interactions, both individually and structurally? Intersectionality as a framework aims to look at that and aims to deconstruct all of those things. It isn't just a thing to say that you're inclusive. And I don't think one person is like, I am intersectional, more as it's more like I have an intersectional experience, right? And it's just like, read Black women. Kimberly Crenshaw like came up with the word purposefully, and if people read her and if people listened to her, it would be much more meaningful instead of taking this word, not understanding it, and then applying it in very disrespectful ways, to be honest. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much for your thoughts and your honest, right? People need to hear this. People need to understand in the ways in which, like, we take a word and we decide what it means versus really looking at that source. And another call to action for everyone who's like watching this is also read things from people who are not just white, straight, cis men, right? A lot of those authors are writing about our experiences, what it feels like to be us. And so I challenge you all to like look up the author who wrote books, understand like where the information is coming from, and really make sure that it is representative of the text. And I think that's such a good call to action, to just know, where did this come from? Trace the word back, understand the history and the meaning and the intent behind it. Thank you so much. So now we're gonna switch to Nico. Your question is, how can artists and organizers best go about creating intersectional spaces and representation for queer folks?
Hi, everyone. So this I think has, even as a queer person, even as a person who has been doing this work, still wants to keep on improving. I think there are some really basic things that a lot of us are pretty well versed in, such as, asking pronouns, and asking pronouns in a way that is like not just when a trans person is in the room, but making this part of normal practice. Another thing that that I think has been mentioned that I really appreciated was like the nature of storylines becoming solely about trauma, when it comes to like that. I mean, I think that's a reason that I really there was a point where I feel like I ran out of representation of trans people that I wanted to read for a long time, and because of how it was just based in like, oh, my parents disowned me and all these things, and these are very real things. I think that something that has been particularly something I felt very passionately about is creating the spaces for joy. And that's something that that my friend and I, we put together a press that was specifically about centering really joyful experiences from the margins of like gender and sexuality and all the other identities that might come into play with that, because it never does exist in a vacuum. And allowing for that to be there, and allowing for those nuances, and just considering your representation in that way. I think there's also, when it comes to art, there can be this sort of pivot from from the personal to the public, where, let's say in this time where we are also seeing some increased restrictions and fears around reproductive rights, we might have a uterus and want to be a woman and say, I want to protect women, but then also consider, what is that saying? Now I see, even despite someone who has a uterus, I see a uterus as like a symbol for protecting rights and like everything in that realm. And I see it, and then I'm like, oh, that's not for me. That's not my space. That's for someone else, even though I have the same anatomy. And so these are just a few small things to consider when we move forward, and when we move forward into this time further, specifically regarding this identity, but also being sure to be open to the fact that there are a lot of other identities, and how can we grow, and how can we understand more through art about others around us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nico. Two things I wanted to pull out was, right, showing up for joy. I think that's like a constant. I say that all the time. We shouldn't just show up when there is trauma or death or violence. Like, also show up to a barbecue, show up to a clothing swap, show up to an open mic, right? Because I don't want the first time for me to see you is like when something terrible has happened, and that's when all of a sudden you start to care about me. And so I appreciate you bringing this into the conversation of like, just support people, see them when they're happy, enjoy their happiness, and also show up when things like don't go well. But I also want to see you on this opposite side as well, because as Tyescha mentioned before around like pleasure activism, like joy is revolutionary, like especially joy of like marginalized folks, people of color, queer folks, trans folks. Like, we're not supposed to be happy. We are supposed to be like under the system, and the fact that we are vibrant and surviving, and that all of us look so good right now in these squares, like that's joy, that's happiness. Like, all of this is so beautiful. And then the other part that's so important is like, we all have so much work to do, right, in terms of organizing. This recently came up, especially around creating spaces for like non-binary folks, gender fluid folks, gender neutral, and how that's almost always grouped with women, and the ways in which we typically corral people and aren't actually thinking, right? The goal is maybe we want a space that doesn't include, right, cis men, and that's what we're getting at. But instead of doing that, we're not respecting people's identities. And so even thinking about my intent is good, or my intent is to provide a safe space for whatever, but it's like, how are we doing that? What's the language? How do we change titles? How do we change descriptions so that we can mark things as safe and be really clear about, this is what we want, this is how we want to open the space? And that's hard. That's like really deep, hard work, and you cannot be lazy in this work, which is what I heard from you, Nico, right? We have to be diligent. It is hard work, and it is necessary to move our community forward. So this next question is for Goddess Tyescha, which is, which one of your identities leads your creativity, if any, or if not, but just an explanation of how that parses out in your work.
I think none of them necessarily lead my art. I think my understanding of being part of a marginalized group in many ways, or in every piece of my identity, has really led my art and my activism and my want for change. As I was listening to everyone, I started to really think and divulge in the understanding of the fact that there are concentration camps right now on our borderline, that people cannot speak, our second language learners, and we're in the middle of a pandemic and it's hard enough to find work. That the legalization of getting documented in our society is so difficult, particularly for people of color. The fact that people are still being incriminated and are still incarcerated for the use of drugs, or for marijuana cases. And that so many states do not allow these people to vote, and do not allow these people to have housing or to apply for colleges. I think about marginalized groups that, like indigenous people, that we now do a land acknowledgement for, but still won't give back their lands. I think all of those intersectionalities have really thrived my art to really grow and develop. And more importantly, has really made me want people to have a voice in that. I was very disdained during my getting my master's that every single time there was a question about Black people or about Latinx folks, I was the person to ask because I was the only brown person in the classroom. And I remember distinctively always considering and always speaking out on the fact that, guess what? I can't speak off for this intersectionality because also the way we maneuver society is going to be very different. What I will say is that my art has really explored resilience, the fact that, I can grow up in a society that oppresses me or was structurally not, or even when we were talking about pleasure, structurally does not want me to feel joy, structurally does not want me to feel pleasure and still feel pleasure and joy. And so in that, I think that I wouldn't say there's one intersectionality because I think what was said before is very true in the sense of I don't feel one piece of my intersectionality is what holds or grasps the I hold the hardest to. But what I will say is that all of my intersectionalities have thrived me to build resilience and then to also want people to be heard, their narrative to be heard by them and not the perpetuation of stereotypes. And then I think in the bigger scheme of things, as I previously kind of said, it's really acted as a way of me to release, to find freedom, to find joy, to find anger, to find anguish, to find any kind of emotion that I feel, and has really allowed me to heal through that. Because the reality for me is that I am in a place where I am trying to heal homophobia. I am healing racism. I am healing all of these people. I am healing the fact that I'm supposed to have an accent, but I am fluent in Spanish. I am healing the fact that I am not supposed to be surviving and thriving in today's society. I'm healing the fact that I'm an educated Black woman that apparently was thought that once I got the education and became enslaved financially through the educational system, that I would find freedom and feel a voice in today's society. But there's no degree in the world to deal with racism the way it is has been infiltrated in our society. I think that art has gave me a platform to speak on those things, and then also made me want to fight for other people to find that platform, be it in visual arts, be it in poetry, be it in writing, be it in any plethora that they can find that healing space or that space to express their experience, their humanistic experience has been kind of where that connection has really made my intersectionalities, my activist work, and then my art ability really come together.
Thank you so much. That was so artfully spoken. And I loved what you said, right? There's no degree to help us deal with racism, right? There is no PhD in that. And the wild thing, right? No matter how much education we get, we are still our identities and people still don't believe us. People still think we're angry Black folks. People still think our identities are a choice, no matter what we accumulate. And so this work is deeper, right? And it's art, it's education, it's learning and healing. And that is the big part, right? A lot of this is healing. And I know we talk about resilience and power and strength, but it is so much healing, right? So many wounds that get opened when you do this work and start to understand yourself and the world of dang, it is rough. It is rough. And if we really think about it, right, the healing we have to do in order to get through, to protect ourselves and to continue to do this work. So I appreciate y'all so much. So what we're going to do is ask a question to everyone and I'll call on you. But so we're all here located in Colorado Springs. And so two-part question. What does intersectionality look like right now in the Colorado Springs art community? And what changes would we want to see in the art community in terms of intersectionality or kind of anything else that you want to throw in? But we'll start with Michael.
Well, I think we probably all have a slightly skewed, maybe not opinion, but representation is really good in the art community, in our communities, right? Because of the work that the organizers, Poetry 719, here, Nico, I know the queer community, like there is an opportunity for all of us to see ourselves represented and to be around people who share our lived experience. So that's great. That's one thing that I appreciate. It's one thing that has made my life feel, complete. Realizing that I grew up and I didn't see many Black people. I didn't have many Black friends, and now, I do. And seeing that lack and noticing it and being able to process what that means for me, as a full adult. What I would like to see is more people outside of these identities showing up and promoting and taking, just being a part of the space, even though they know that, maybe we don't need to hear them, right? Because part of allyship is knowing, like, we need you, but we don't need you to talk for us. We need you. We need to know that you're listening to us. We need to know that you're taking in these words that we're saying, this art that we're crafting and giving to you, and then you go home and digest it, and maybe you challenge Uncle Sam at Thanksgiving when he starts talking nonsense about, abortion or whatever, political, our very existence is political when it shouldn't be. So challenge, that our lives are not political. They shouldn't be political. So that, I think that's what I would like to see, is more people outside of the lived experience that we share in those spaces. And that goes on, like me too. Like, I am a cis man, and showing up for queer people, right? And for my trans friends, and being in those spaces. And even though I call myself an ally, that doesn't mean I know everything. That doesn't mean that I can speak for them. I just need to be in those spaces and saying the things outside of those spaces, so that my friends know that I am a person that they can trust. Because if I take in those words and then I go outside of this community and I'm not doing anything with what I have taken in, what I've seen, and what I've heard, then what is the point? You can't be silent outside. Be silent when you're listening to those oppressed communities, and then be loud when you're outside of them, talking to the people who oppress them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I mean, in Colorado Springs, it's hard to find your people, right? I grew up here my entire life, and like my adulthood is when I finally had friends who look like me, just friends who like truly weren't just white. And I think for a long time I pushed against that, because I was like, oh, no, I just need to stay with this group, right? I just need to have these friends. And so really growing into like, yeah, no, I want people who look like me, who have different experiences, who understand the world. And so I appreciate that so much. And Michael, you just drop in knowledge, right? More people need to come and listen and be quiet, right? We do these events, we do like Black Voices Matter, like Nico does Keep Colorado Springs Queer, right? We do these things, and then people whose identities are not in the title are like, oh no, that's not for me. I will not go. And I'm like, but yeah, you should go, and then just be quiet and just listen, right? And I think there's beauty. And so this is me, Ashley Cornelius, co-director of Poetry 719, inviting everyone who's listening, everywhere you are, is to go to an event that does not fit your identity description, right? As Arts Month and Peak Raider always says, have one new cultural experience in October, and do a cultural experience that's outside of your norm, right? That is so important. And this October is your challenge, is to go into a room where you're like, I do not get it, and just sit and listen and learn, which goes back to this like joy thing, right? Go to events, go to get-togethers where you don't fit in, where you are a marginalized person, maybe where you have never been before. And I always say that those minutes of like, wow, I was the only person who wasn't a part of this group, and that felt weird. That is all of our experience for the entire time we have been on this earth. So the hour that it feels weird for you, that's 29 years for me, right? And so like it's important that we start to have these experiences. So same question for Nico.
So I wasn't born and raised here. I grew up in Denver, and when I talk to people who've lived here a long time, they've said things like, Colorado Springs is on a really great trajectory. There's all these artists here, like, and now and then there's the events that Ashley and Chris are hosting with Poetry 719, and it makes such a difference. And that was a big part of my experience, and what made me stay in Colorado Springs after I graduated is starting the queer open mic and then realizing, like, oh my God, here they are. Here's the people. Where were they? I didn't know. And knowing that people do crave that space together. I think so. It's amazing. We have these spaces, and we have more artists moving to Colorado Springs. And I've been in a class where I'm talking and listening to a lot of city officials talking about the trajectory the city is on, where it's like, economically, great, jobs, great, artists are coming, great. And, and there's a lot of this celebration. But this thing I keep coming back to is that it's not just about the spaces we're in when we're making art. It's about the spaces that we're in when we're just living. I think the biggest, most important thing, if this city cares about its artists, if this city cares about like having a vibrant art scene, having just a community that is vibrant and not homogenous, is housing in a big way. This is something that and the reason I am feeling particularly concerned about this is because I came from Denver, and then I could no longer live in Denver because of how expensive it was. And that's the thing, is like, I think there's this sort of, we want to live in progressive spaces. We want to be in places where we're accepted. But they have to be affordable. That's the bottom line. If you want us to be here, this has to be affordable. And so seeing the city itself, city officials, city committees and boards supporting artists by saying, you know what, we're going to have affordable housing. We're not going to keep on building these like luxury high rises downtown that like, who can afford those? We're actually going to build housing that fits the people who live here, rather than trying to build housing to bring in people. So that's a big thing. That's the bottom line, is like, we just have to live here. But then seeing more support, like downtown now, downtown's that way, that's why I'm pointing that way. Downtown now having this amazing mural that is massive regarding the missing and murdered and just the tragedies of what's happening to a lot of Indigenous women in this country. It's stuff like that, like big, loud, and maybe uncomfortable, but actually making the space, paying for that art, paying for the work that community organizers do, like Poetry 719. Like, if you're like, you bring so much to the city, Ashley, and you deserve to be recognized for it by the city. And I think that goes for any artist doing this work.
Thank you so much, Nico, and for bringing up, right, all of these other like systemic aspects, right? And I think that's what ties into intersectionality and the ways in which we can like go down these lines, right? Of like, you have to pay artists, like, period, you have to pay artists for the work that we're doing, and also, right, provide spaces that we can live. And I think we've talked about this a lot. It's one thing to say, like, we support artists, we're here, we're doing it, but if it's not sustainable for us, if we don't feel appreciated, if we're not treated in the same ways we treat a plumber, right, which is my example, I would never be like, you know what, plumbing my toilet is a great opportunity for you. I will tell everybody in the city that you are the best plumber. I'll take a picture of you. I'll put it up on Facebook, right? Like, we do that with artists, but not with other skills. And so you're bringing up an important part, that there's so much systemically that has to go into supporting and actually like creating space for intersectional artists. Yeah, and for those watching, listening, downtown Colorado Springs is doing a lot of great projects. There is that mural that Nico referenced, and also there's some incredible art, very specifically from Black women, that is going up all around downtown. So I know Jaron Snaka Rose, Art by Rizzo is up, Jazz Holmes from Fort Collins is up. So some really integral folks are being uplifted visually downtown. So thank you so much, Nico, for bringing that into the light. Goddess Tyescha, same question. What does the community look like now in terms of intersectionality, and what do you want it to look like?
I'm really excited in many ways, and I've been really impressed with the bravery of the people in intersectionalities, particularly like Ashley and Beasley and Phil really taking on this. This is what we want to see the arts community, and also just being really authentic to those intersectionalities and how brave that takes. Leading on to that, how brave that has been. In saying that, though, I would also like to say that I still feel like we live in a very unsafe place. I have to be honest about that every single time I'm speaking to someone about Colorado Springs, because the reality of these intersectionalities, and it's kind of that conversation around, intersectionalities, really cool term, I'm so woke, and, this is so sexy. But at the end of the day, people are still dying for these intersectionalities, right? Like in our society, Black trans females are being killed in huge numbers, right? Very distinctive. And queer folks are still being attacked. And being a Black woman is so radical that I cannot walk down the street and not worry for my life, because I have been verbally attacked multiple times for just walking downtown, right? So the reality of our city is that we are in dire need of more eccentric understanding and being progressive, and how you show up. And I think this was mentioned by someone, like, how do you show up as an ally, right? I think Skills was talking about this. Like, when we talk about showing up as an ally, it's not enough for you to just like, oh yeah, I have a gay flag and I have a Black friend. That's not enough. At the realism is that you have to show up and show out. And that means that you have to be uncomfortable. And sometimes you have to come into our space and feel a little uncomfortable. But through that experience, hopefully you can gain a little bit of knowledge, and we can plant a seed that will hopefully be watered by you reading and going to more arts, and also exploring who you are and what your intersectionalities, because up to a certain degree, like a lot of us do hold it. Even the cis white male might be impoverished, right? Like that's the reality. So that's an intersectionality right there. I think that, I would really like to see a city in which there's creative space and there's there's space for safe spaces for everyone. Because the reality is that, there isn't any spaces for queer people to just hang out, particularly around my age group, you know what I mean? I will say that Nico has provided many spaces for me, and so has Ashley. Hey, God. But being in Colorland has been really difficult too in itself. And we are seeing with the policy that's being written by this administration and the attacks that are happening with Black people and queer people, that we're seeing higher levels of depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation, you know what I mean? And substance abuse. This is the reality. So as much as, I can sit here and I can celebrate the fact that these are my intersectionalities, and we are going to show resilience and we have power in all those pieces, we are being attacked as a people. And I feel like our city is not really addressing that correctly. And I think in agreement with what Nico is saying, in the sense of like having access points, we are living in a city that's also throwing poor people, impoverished people out of their complexes to build high rise. So when we talk about intersectionalities and how people are being attacked for their intersectionalities, I think Colorado Springs is the epicenter of that reality. And I feel like downtown Colorado Springs and the city tries to promote this is all the things that are thriving, but when in reality it is not safe to hold all of these intersectionalities, to speak out on all of these intersectionalities, and to just exist sometimes in Colorado Springs, because we do live in a very racist, homophobic, uninclusive city. And that is the reality. And that has been historically what we have seen. We have that mural now, but the reality is that You know, it took 5 years for the city to give Indigenous Day to Indigenous people, and this is their land. You know what I mean? You have council people saying, oh my gosh, I all of a sudden noticed that Indigenous people existed here. What? Like, when we talk about what implications are happening in Colorado Springs, yeah, we could say it's getting progressive. I've been here for about 6 years, and I have seen like the growth of that. But that's been through the people that are living the existence and not finding safe spaces and then deciding I'm going to create a safe space. It is not because the city is coming and saying this is what we want. In actuality, there is a Confederate flag every single block that I go down. That doesn't make me feel safe personally. Um, what I would like to see is the fact that we're eradicating racism and we're eradicating homophobia, and that we are honoring our Mexican brothers and sisters, our Chicanos, and our indigenous folks, and and that we are taking flight as an ally, which means that District 12 shouldn't have an Indian on their mascot, and making change hurts and making change is difficult, but the city has to take initiative to do that.
Goddess Tyescha, I was just smiling that whole time. I was like, I hope people at home are writing stuff down, taking notes, because everything you said was so true and is so important, right? The safety aspects, the city engagement, I think, kind of mixing what both you and Nico said, right, is that it's grassroots organizations who are doing it, right? It's people, it's like connections who are making these safe spaces. And what I'm hearing that we need to see, right, is the city to endorse, or the city to fund, or the city to come alongside, right? And right, we have like Inside Out, which is the only space, right, for youth. But then when we go to adults, we don't have those spaces. We don't have these community community centers. And so there really isn't this space to meet, to network, to understand. It's all on us, which is almost always the case, right? We oppressed people have to find their way out of oppression on their own versus like getting that support and that help. And so I just appreciate everything that you said, and that there is, right, a call to action and things that need to be done, and performative allyship just ain't it, right? We need accomplices. And accomplice means that, like, if I go down for something, you're probably going to get implicated too, right? I need you to drive the getaway car. I need you to know where things are. That's what I need out of an ally, is like, if something happens to me, it happens to you too, right? You're in it just as much. And that's what I would like to see in Colorado Springs as well, right? Is like, you are really riding for us. And when comments come in about those murals, about those paintings, which come in all of the time, I want to see people in higher positions than me coming and saying that's not okay, right? Because I know all of us in here have fought a good fight against racism, transphobia, homophobia on the internet, on the things that happen. And so I just want, other people to come alongside and do that with us. So same.
Can I just take a second, Ashley, and say thank you for providing those spaces, and thank you for being accomplice, and thank you for like the people that are doing the work, because I think it takes a lot of bravery. And Nico, because I have been in queer spaces because of you too, you know what I mean? So thank you, and Black spaces, you know what I mean? Because it takes a lot of bravery.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And right, thank all of you. Like, y'all are fantastic and have like fed into the community in so many different ways, which is why I selected y'all as panelists, because like this is the work, right? Y'all are in it, boots on the ground, doing it, usually for no money. So like, we're out here doing our best for the community to give back. So Irina, we're going to close out this question with you. What does it look like for you intersectionally? And I might add, also being a student at UCCS, right? I think you're in a different section than the rest of us in terms of like school, university culture. And then what would you like to see in terms of intersectionality?
Awesome. So like on the backs of what everybody just said, it seems like the work, like intersectional activist work, is being done always by the most marginalized in our communities. Always. I don't want to be able to name all the organizers who are doing all the things. I don't want to have to know literally everybody who is doing the good work, because there should be so many people doing the work that I don't have to know them all. They don't all have to be my homies. Like, it's great, it's fun to like have this like tight-knit community who, if I go to a function, I know who's doing the function, but that means that there's not enough of us doing that. That means there's not support. That means like it isn't prevalent everywhere and all the time. So like I can name the people doing the work, and that is actually an issue. And so like particularly in academic spaces, there is no intersection, like that doesn't exist. Unless you're specifically like me in like women's ethnic studies, which strives to always be intersectional, to always work from that lens. But on a university perspective, that does not exist, right? Like and I wish it did in some aspect, because if the question is what exists now and then what do I want to change, the what exists now is not even a question. It's like, okay, now what do you want to change? In terms of students of color aren't cared for, and students of color aren't cared for, queer students aren't cared for, and they're seen as two different groups instead of these groups that intersect with each other. And often like people who have both of those identities go through something completely different. Also, the acceptance of anti-Blackness is disgusting. Like, and the way I just want to tell a lot of people that I meet, yeah, you're being anti-Black. Yes, you're dismissing Black people all the time because you're assuming that we don't also have these experiences. And in the university system, anti-Blackness is an acceptable thing to have. Like, anti-Blackness is an acceptable thing to be. And it's just like the work hasn't even started. And it's sad to say, but the work just hasn't even been started. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. That's like a necessary and important opinion, especially as we think about like students and universities and what that looks like and how you're going to feel like moving out of that into young professionalism. That, right, if there's nothing there, right, we need to like start creating. And this important aspect that we really like have wraparound services for one thing, and we ignore everything else. Whatever we think is the most salient, the most important, the easiest to get money for, that's the identity that we pull out. But we're not pulling anything else that may also contribute to the ways in which we are struggling or feeling oppressed, which is not good, right? It needs to be holistic, and there has to be better systems in place to support us. I am just so deeply grateful for like everything that you all have shared, the ways in which you have discussed intersectionality, the way that you have explained it in your own unique individualist experiences, and the calls to action, right? There's so much work that needs to be done. And also, Irina, you mentioned like, all the people who organize, right? And that's right. This needs to be saturated. There needs to be complete saturation where like everyone is doing this work, and it's not just like me and Nico and Tyescha and Ash and like all of these people. It should be everyone. And I think that's really important to think about it's cool to be recognized, but that shouldn't even be a thing, right? I always think of this, I forget the comedian, I don't know, but was talking about diversity and how when Obama was president, people were like, we did it. Diversity, inclusion. And this person was like, no, baby. In order for us to actually have diversity, inclusion, and equity, we need 44 Black presidents in a row with no one else interrupting. That is equity. And I was like, oh my God, right? That sticks in my head all the time. One person is not it, right? It needs to be, a bunch of people for a long time with no interruptions of oppression. That's what we need. And that's what I want people to take away from intersectionality. It is not just having a Black queer woman at your event. That is not it. It has to be more. It has to be in your board. It has to be in your policies and in procedures. It has to be what you do on the weekends. It has to be the way you show up on social media. It has to be the ways in which you support folks, right? It is in everything we do, this intersectionality. And for many of us, we are doing this as survival. Like, this is what we do every day. And so we're inviting you to start to think critically, and to not be lazy, right? This is work that takes a lot. It is emotionally exhausting. It is draining. It is psychologically scary to go to these places. But I urge you, like, this is so deeply important. And before we close, I wanted to, we had a question in the chat about how to get in touch with the panelists or our social medias. And Lindsay's fantastic. If you go to Poetry 719 COS on Instagram, all of these wonderful folks are tagged on our social. So look for us on Instagram. Again, Poetry 719 COS. You can also go to our website, poetry719.com, and you'll see everyone linked as well. But yes, please get in touch with these folks, pay them for their time, have them come in and talk to you, have them be your consultant. But again, let's put money back into the community, because first and foremost, we all need to vote. It is coming up very soon. And also know that we vote with our money, we vote with our time, we vote with our energy. So really recognize the places that you're putting yourself. Again, have one new cultural experience every day in October, a cultural experience that is outside of your identity. And I want to leave you all with this, with a haiku that I wrote. Here we go. Black, fat, queer woman, intersectionality, holistic healing. And so this has been holistic healing for me. Recognizing intersectionality is healing for all of us. And I'm just so thankful to be able to moderate, and thankful to all of our panelists. And I'll turn it over to Jonathan to close.
Ashley, I am so happy that you worked in a haiku.
I did it.
That has made my day, along with this lovely conversation. I want to thank all 5 of you for this thoughtful conversation and taking the time this afternoon to showcase the power of and continuing work of the arts for this topic moving forward. So thank you again. Really appreciate it. The next Arts Month community conversation, there are only 2 left, so now's the chance to watch some of these. It'll be Monday morning, in fact. Dance, Soft Skills, and Saving the World. Jordan McHenry from Colorado Springs Dance Theater will lead that conversation at 9 a.m. Monday morning. We'll hope you'll be able to join us then. In the meantime, artsoctober.com is the place to find all previous community conversations and to find out more ways to get involved with Arts Month overall. Thanks for joining us, and as Ashley has said, and as is the slogan of Arts Month, have at least one new cultural experience. In 2020, we're saying virtual or in person with family or friends this October. Thanks again. Have a good rest of your day.